The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey, welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and with me is Brett Roberts. How are you, Brett?
I'm excellent. Thank you, Paul.
Very
It's good to be here yet again.
Yes, always good to have you on the show. Raging against the machine.
Machine learning, mate. Rage against the machine learning.
Okay, I was trying to work out what I was missing on your T-shirt there. Maybe you can remind listeners where you fit into this big, wide world of tech at the moment, or
I've I don't know. I've been in the NZ tech scene for a long time, a couple of decades and a bit probably. And right now, I'm having a lot of fun working with a government organisation called Callaghan Innovation, working in particular with software as a service companies. So helping create more of them, accelerate as many of them as we can, and get lots and lots of them to be huge and successful as quickly as possible.
Fantastic. Well, it's certainly lines up with what I think we should be doing. So yeah, great to have your expertise in there, helping Callaghan, Brett. As always, lots to chat through. I thought maybe we can just start with a thank you to our show partners. So thank you to Vocus and 2 Degrees, Vodafone, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. Now, first up in the news stories was something that I came across in sort of global media, but I hadn't really crossed my radar, or certainly not recently. Is a company called Humble Bee Bio, a New Zealand company that seemed to be doing some really innovative work, and I'm struggling to describe it, Brett. So I'm wondering if you can have a go at sharing what they're up to with bees and creating this, what is understood to be a very remarkable bioplastic.
So I will apologise in advance to the chairman of their board, Julia Chambers, who's a former colleague of mine at Callaghan, if I mangle this, which is highly likely. But my understanding is what they've done is identified a bee that, as part of its normal natural life cycle, creates a bioplastic for lining its hive. They've taken the genetic encoding of that within the bee and implanted that into a microbe of some sort, and basically they feed whatever it is that the microbes like to eat, probably Big Macs and stuff, and the microbe effectively excretes or creates this bioplastic, which is a similar process or way of methodology, I guess, that was used by LanzaTech for using genetically modified microbes to create methanol or ethanol, one or the other. Jet fuel was one of them. And companies like Perfect Day that are using the same sort of technology to get microbes to create milk, chemically identical milk without the need for cows. Pretty cool. And like you, I haven't seen a lot of this company mentioned in New Zealand. I've seen Julia post a few interesting things up on LinkedIn that I've kind of looked at. But they've raised some pretty serious money, and they've got some pretty amazing people involved, and the product's quite amazing. According to the TechCrunch website, it's hydrophobic, it's waterproof, it's flame retardant, it's stable up to 240 degrees Celsius. That's a pretty amazing thing for a bee to create, and even more amazing if they can scale this out without the need for all those bees.
Yeah, well, that was the thing that stood out from their website, is what an incredible plastic or bioplastic it is, with that heat resistance, resistant to water, to acids and industrial solvents and so on. So yeah, pretty unique, but I don't know how easy it is to go from that to scaling it. But with the $5 million that they've raised in convertible notes as part of their Series A funding round, I would hope there'll be some some very good outcomes. So certainly one to follow. And I think it's a reminder to me that there is just so much innovation that goes on here in New Zealand, and most of it we
Yep.
don't see, because often they're reasonably small teams. There's not always a lot of media coverage that is there, and so it's great to hear about these stories.
I think
And
the hardest part with this will be negotiating the intellectual property rights with the bees. But once they've got that part of it sorted out, I'm sure it'll be downhill from there. But you're right about the innovation stuff. Seriously, I mean, one of the neat things about working for Callaghan Innovation is I get to see peripherally all sorts of interesting things that are going on in the New Zealand, research and development and innovation landscape. And quite honestly, there is world-class, leading-edge stuff that gets done in this country. By what is an ever-expanding pool of often already experienced entrepreneurs and founders and technologists. So there's quite a ecosystem that's built up over the years, but we could always do better, right? We need to be moving quickly with this stuff. It's an internationally competitive landscape, and there's obviously this big war for talent going on at the moment. And so we need the people to build the businesses. Everyone else wants the people as well. So it's an ongoing tussle, I guess. But there is some really good stuff getting done in this country, quite seriously.
Yeah, definitely. Now, getting onto the international side of things, we've spoken a little bit about things in Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine over recent months. One of the things that keeps coming through is the disruption to a lot of businesses who have exited from Russia and Belarus. Last week we talked a little bit about Cloudflare, who were staying in Russia, but the understanding was is so that allows a level of sort of freedom of international press to actually reach Russian audiences. But I saw HP exiting, and it sounds like it's something that will lead to sort of $1 billion hit in their sales. So it is quite a disruptor. But when you look at the size of the Russian market, sort of in the scheme of it, it's generally a small percentages for most of these global businesses. But whenever I think about this, just the scenario, could you imagine New Zealand not being able to get hold of any of current technology? Like, what is this going to do to the Russian people over a longer period of time in terms of education and other aspects. I've just sort of I see the importance of doing everything that can be done, but it makes me think, man, what must life be like in these countries where there are heavy sanctions and you're running on very old technologies? What must it be like in North Korea, for instance? It's kind of hard to imagine, because things just move so quickly from a technological standpoint, and we just eat it up. We just go for it with whatever the new technologies are, and it's kind of hard to imagine being in a place where you couldn't actually access all of that new technology.
Yeah, I find this quite interesting, right? So you look at companies like HP and that exiting, they have to, right? It's effectively a trade-off of revenue and against reputational impact, right? But there was an interesting story that was published a couple of days ago, talking about Taiwan restricting CPUs to Russia and Belarus. And it's an incredibly tight restriction. So they're not allowed to export CPUs that have greater than 5 gigaflop per second performance. The Sony PS2, the peak performance was 6.2 gigaflops. So how was the Sony PS2, right? Not allowed to have a clock speed of 25 megahertz or higher. Data transfer rates of less than or equal to 2.5 megabits per second, which is pretty darn slow, and no packages with more than 144 pins, right? So, and there's a bunch of other things in there around gate propagation, delay times, and all sorts of other bits and pieces. But it's clear that, that is going to absolutely cripple any sort of, high-tech business that's based in Russia. Obviously, it'll put a severe crimp in their development of weaponry as well, which to me says there is a massive opportunity, and I'm sure it's underway already, of people smuggling those devices into Russia. That's exactly where they'll head. They're very small. They're high value. You can move millions of dollars with them in the boot of a car. So I'm sure that that's happening as we speak, right?
Yeah. I think this is going to be fascinating to look back on in a few years' time, or however long it takes to get through this period of history, and what does it lead to in terms of whether it's innovation and in those locations that are hit by these sorts of sanctions. I would just, it sort of blows my mind in a way to think of it, but it's happening, and I think that the legislation is there, where companies like HP probably in most cases don't actually have a choice from a legal standpoint with what governments are putting in place, and as you say, Taiwan will be caught up in that as well, and so the list of companies is absolutely huge.
And bearing in mind, a lot of these companies that are pulling out right now, particularly in the tech space, have no doubt massive interactions and contracts with the American government and its law enforcement agencies and military agencies and security agencies and things like that. So I suspect in many ways, foregoing $1 billion in revenue out of Russia was actually a 5-minute decision at a board level, right? Because the consequences of not doing so were substantial. So no brainer.
Yeah. Now, also on the front of Ukraine, we've heard about Starlink, the satellite internet service from SpaceX, becoming very quickly available in Ukraine. I don't think it was available prior to the war. SpaceX and Elon Musk have pushed that forward. I think US government have probably funded a whole lot of these satellites, but that has created a new scenario that probably most of us wouldn't have spent a whole lot of time thinking about, which is the situation where now you've got the likes of Russia, China, and others who are looking at what's happened with the satellite communication, and no doubt wondering whether they can put a stop to it. And so, and we've seen little bits and pieces in recent years of one country or another doing something that disrupts, and in fact, I think SpaceX was even challenged about how close some of the Starlink satellites got to things that China were doing, and so on. So there's a real tussle starting in space as we go from having a relatively small number of satellites that are up there, performing a variety of functions, to where suddenly it's affordable for just about any business to do something in space if they're of a reasonable scale. And countries like New Zealand, that there wasn't much that we had as a country in terms of in space. You would maybe have a slice of a satellite being used by the likes of Sky, and varying things in place, but where actually the number of satellites, serving our little country is growing and growing very, very quickly. So I'm kind of curious how this whole thing will play out. It's another one of those areas where, in some ways, I don't want to think about it at all. What's the impact if the satellites that have gone up to deliver internet to those in remote locations were to get taken out by an unfriendly, party, shall we
Actor.
say?
Yeah, look,
Yeah.
I think there's a whole lot of interesting things going on in here, right? So one is that whole massive constellation of satellites that Elon Musk wants to put up there for Starlink, which of course astronomers around the world are having conniptions about because of the damage to the night sky. I don't know if you've seen them going over, but and they have done some work to darken them, but they certainly, if you like taking long shots of the cosmos, that stuff is not your friend.
Not ideal. Yeah.
No, it's not ideal. The number of satellites that are going to go up is astronomical. I can't remember exactly how many, but it's many thousands. And there are also other competitors looking at doing the same thing. So I believe the Chinese government are doing something, and there will be others as well, because obviously this shifts the tables from if you're a Spark or a Vodafone or someone, to have a satellite-based, low latency, high bandwidth connection kind of disrupts cell phone infrastructure and a whole lot of other things, right? So I think it's interesting from that perspective. And then there's the whole satellites as weapons thing, which obviously Russia's been experimenting with. I think they blew up a satellite in space a year or two back, which created a huge cloud of debris that's now being tracked. I'm sure
That's
that was
right.
no accident.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff we're seeing, right? And of course, the stuff that we're seeing is only the scratching of the surface. There'll be a whole lot of other stuff going on in space as well. The other thing too, of course, is that these people using these technologies in places like Ukraine are they are UHF effectively radios. Those things are trackable and traceable, and so there is a very real element of people putting themselves in danger if they're using these types of things, right? It's not difficult to triangulate a radio signal. So look, I think the whole thing's fascinating. I mean, when I first saw Starlink, it was one of those, oh my gosh, what an incredible visionary idea, which is kind of what we've come to expect from Elon Musk. We can talk about Elon Musk later, but when it comes to visionary ideas, he's pretty good at visionary ideas, right? He's a dick, but he's pretty good with the visionary ideas. That is a brilliant idea and incredibly disruptive. And so I think the benefits of that can be substantial, but there are, without a doubt, some real downsides to it, particularly from that night sky perspective. But that's a lot of hardware to be sitting up there. They can deorbit them. I'm not sure if you're aware,
2,500 apparently at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They can deorbit them if they're damaged or if non-functional, so they can actually take them out using an ion, I think a type of ion thruster, slow them down and drop them back into the atmosphere. The other thing they're looking at doing too is using lasers in space to communicate between them, right? That's the next step. So
That's right. Yeah.
Instead of bouncing signals back and forth around the globe, actually using laser to transmit up in space, which is absolutely incredible. So yeah, really interesting technology. I think what was interesting was just how fast they got them into Ukraine and what a difference it's made. And I'm sure Russia's very envious, and they won't be able to do much if they're not getting CPUs or if they're getting PS2 level CPUs. I think they might need something a little bit better to go and build Starlink systems with.
Yeah, look, and there's the 2,500 that are up there at the moment, and then the last few days we've heard, a little bit more, a reminder of the sort of next generation that we knew were coming, that are said to be 4 to 5 times bigger than the current generation that are up there. So, yeah, talking about 7 meters long, 1.2 tons a piece, and that's going to require the new rocket from SpaceX, because the Falcon 9, which has been sending them up in sort of, I don't know, 100, 120 or so at a time isn't going to be able to handle this. So the Starship is what's going to be required to go to that next level. And I mean, this is this I guess the area where Elon's businesses have done well is they seem to be able to iterate very, very quickly.
Yep.
And so whilst the other players are, still mostly sort of talking about putting their constellations up there, and look, I know there's a few other players with satellites up, but there's certainly nobody that is anywhere near the 2,500 that they're at. I think the other ones I've noticed, probably not even 10% of the way, there to that sort of level of coverage, maybe even 1%. So at a very different level, and here we are, and they're getting ready to launch a whole new level of satellite.
That CubeSat stuff is quite amazing, right? I mean, that whole democratization of getting satellites into space is just gobsmacking the pace at which it's happened. Someone told me a while back that because of Rocket Lab, New Zealand has the highest ratio of rocket scientists to the general population in the world. I don't know if that's true, but I tell Australians that on a regular basis. Anyway,
it sounds pretty cool.
Oh no, it's one of those stats you can pull off, right? You just look them in the eye and tell them.
Yeah.
But again, Peter Beck, a big part of his vision was the fact that these CubeSats, are going to absolutely open up space to so many people, and the relative cost of getting them up into space, is just orders of magnitude lower than it used to be. Which is really, really exciting. But man, there's a lot of tin floating around up there. So I hope there's enough space for it. It seems to be quite large. I don't know, but
Yeah. Coming back to New Zealand, I was invited up to SailGP Technologies in Warkworth last week, and got to spend a bit of time with some of the team up there, and it was fascinating. Peter Burling and Blair Turk were up there.
Yep.
And then sort of some of the leadership. And look, I didn't really understand the full story of exactly what had been happening up there, but my understanding is that this base that is now known as SailGP Technologies was originally the New Zealand research being done for Oracle Racing, so that they could compete with New Zealand in the America's Cup. And of course, the Kiwis have always been certainly over decades now have been relied upon by by probably most teams. There's been an element of Kiwis. Certainly, if there's any winning going on, there's usually been Kiwis involved, and so this had been the base that Sir Russell Coates and the Oracle team had been using. But what's changed is they've moved this from a internally focused entity that was focused on just producing technology to try and beat Team New Zealand, to an externally focused entity. And so we got to go through and see some of the impressive tech that was in there. And it was highlighted that SpaceX is now one of their customers. So there was a space in there where you could imagine a rocket fuselage could be put together, and all sorts of things going on. And we didn't get to see any of the confidential stuff like what they're doing with Rocket Lab, but. Did I just say SpaceX before? Anyway, Rocket Lab is a customer, not SpaceX that I'm aware of. But and of course they've been experts. When we look at the America's Cup teams, in working with with varying materials that cross over with Rocket lab in terms of uh, the likes of what are we talking about there? I'm trying to
Carbon fiber technologies and all that sort of.
carbon fiber, yeah.
Yep.
So that was quite fascinating, and also some of the metals that they've worked with, and so yeah, seeing all the different sort of tech and machines and so on was really interesting. But now they're focused on very much sort of export opportunities and serving a global audience. So yeah, really great to see this change. And yes, I'm sure it's probably largely just employing Kiwis rather than it being a New Zealand entity, because it does sit under Oracle Racing, but it positions New Zealand in a good way, and there's an opportunity, I think, for them to work with all sorts of sectors well beyond the sailing world. So yeah, I'll be quite fascinated to see the sorts of things that they end up doing in the years ahead.
If you think about what's happening in all of these spaces, right? There's some quite interesting kind of coming together of technologies. So I remember when I was at Air New Zealand, for example. So when did I leave Air New Zealand? Early 90s, right? I was an aircraft engineer, and carbon fiber technology was like at the bleeding edge of materials technology. It was difficult to use, and there weren't many experts, and people were still trying to figure it out. These days, you can, people can go and buy carbon fiber and do carbon fibery things for themselves. You think about the 3D printing, using titanium for 3D printing, or what's the other metal they use for the rocket engines, right? Now, once upon a time, 3D printing in metals was I'm going to say it anyway, rocket science. And now, there are numerous 3D metal printers, even here in little old New Zealand, right? Rocket Lab and SpaceX have Rocket Lab has a production line printing these things in bulk. Both of those technologies, all of those technologies, were incredibly complex and expensive, and high barriers to entry once upon a time. And now the avionics systems are all available, or people can build this stuff. The fact that we've got incredibly powerful computers that fit on something the size of a credit card is quite amazing. So all of these technologies coming to one point in space and time, and you get the geniuses like Peter Beck, like Elon Musk, bless his cotton socks, who can see a future for these technologies, that us mere mortals maybe sometimes don't. I mean, Peter Beck just blows me away. There's a guy that woke up one morning and hopped out of bed and thought he'd commoditize getting satellites into space. I wake up and try and figure out where the coffee is. And so people like that, true visionaries like that, just amaze me, right? And I think that's what a lot of the leaders in the space, whether it's Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Musk or Peter Beck or whatever, they have this amazing ability to understand where tech is going, and particularly with exponential technologies, extrapolate out where something will be at a given time, and kind of navigating towards that, when everyone else thinks they're absolutely mad and crazy, right? Because how could you possibly build satellites for pennies on the dollar and launch them into space for pieces of pennies on a dollar, whereas they can see what the future looks like. Those are the real visionaries, right?
Yep.
The real crazies.
And I should say, I'm not sure that I actually got confirmation who the space customer was for Sail GP Technologies, but that might have been me putting two and two together to say that it's Rocket Lab. Right. So I'll just cover myself off.
But this is not investment advice, and that's.
But yeah, there were so many things there. There was this one room that was huge. I mean, it would fit an America's Cup, yacht in it. So I don't know, 50 meters, 70 meters long, and basically with this big machine that could shape all sorts of things. So yeah, a big step up from what they were using to the sort of metal type lathes and multiple sort of 4, or was it 5 axis and so on that they were putting things together with that would, build things out of, titanium and so on that might take. I think one example was about over 200 hours to,
to mill or to print or whatever.
To mill. And it was interesting seeing stuff they'd milled, and they could go down to, an absolute, fraction of a millimeter, like I think hundredth of a millimeter or so. And then also seeing some stuff that had been 3D printed, where they'd, started with nothing and built it up, which was less detail, but still an important part of the mix to be able to do that as well. So there seems to be, looking at what they're doing, a lot of opportunities from an environmental perspective, and looking at things that can really help the planet, and that seems to be the big interest for Peter Burling and Blair Tuke. So quite fascinating hearing about some of that stuff, the way they were they're recycling certain materials such as a carbon fiber. And some of the different approaches they're taking, but it sounds like an incredible place to learn, and just for us to be able to grow more experts. One of their challenges seems to be the challenge we're sort of seeing right across the broader tech sector, in terms of getting access to the right people with the right skills. So they're looking to employ, I think, another 70 people, but they just can't find them at the moment. So
it's challenging times for every high tech company at the moment. Technical expertise and experience is in high demand and in short supply. Go and ask your manager for a pay rise now.
Stop it. Won't be able to afford to employ anybody soon. It's sort of, there is that challenge, isn't there, in terms of, employing folks. We've only got so much of a a talent pool here at the moment, and I don't know what the stats are, but certainly hearing suggestions that some folks that have come back to New Zealand during COVID times are some of those folks not feeling like they want to necessarily stay here.
Longer term, and I think we're going to see more and more of that, right? I mean, it's interesting in the SaaS company sector at the moment here in New Zealand. There's a lot of poaching going on from offshore. There are software developers leaving and heading across the Tasman and up into North America and earning considerably more, on day one. And there's an interesting phenomenon too, where you get the well-funded organisations can afford the higher salaries. Those who aren't necessarily at the same stage in their journey or as well-funded, therefore, kind of get to choose from the B pool of talent, and you kind of get this double whammy effect of, some companies have got the A talent and other companies have the B talent, which kind of opens up something of a gap. So there are a lot of challenges in that space, in the talent space at the moment. And to be perfectly frank, I think New Zealand tech sector has never done a particularly good job of attracting people into the sector. I did a presentation years ago at Westlake Girls High School and asked how many of the people there were looking at getting into the tech sector, and a bunch of hands went up. And then I asked how many of them were going to be accountants, and it was about 5x. So I just about burst into tears. So, it's not a sector that's done to date a particularly good job of attracting talent into it. And I think we're really starting to see the downside of that now, the impact of that now. We need to do things better and smarter and faster, without a doubt. Don't get me started. Oh, too late, you did.
Now, other things, there's a bit we can jump into a bit more on the sort of the space side. Tesla sort of, caught some attention, while Elon Musk with his comments about a return to work situation, which I see some companies keen to take advantage of. I saw Atlassian putting some things out there, saying, "Hey, if you want to leave Tesla and work remotely, then come and work for us." Yeah, it's a fascinating scenario, and look, from an outside perspective, you only see certain bits and pieces. But one of the things that I'm hearing more and more is from organisations who are really appreciating the move back into. Oh, we have
Is that a fire alarm?
bit of a fire alarm going on here.
There's no such thing as a bit of a fire alarm, Paul. It's either a fire alarm or there is no fire alarm.
Well, apparently there was one earlier on the day while I wasn't here, but this one's keeping going. So we may have to wrap up, and we'll come back on these topics a little bit later. So thanks everyone for joining us. Brett, maybe we'll get a chance to reconvene, but I need to start probably swiftly exiting the building. So,
I believe that's the protocol, Paul. I'll see you when I see you.
Good to see
Safe
you.
travels.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Cheers. Bye.
See you, mate.